Okay, let me click on here. Live on my Instagram. Let's go live. Go live. Okay. Do you have any feedback over there, Fabian?
No.
Okay, cool. And I don't see the Facebook thing coming up, but oh well. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fran and Friends podcast on Spotify. I have a great guest with me today, Fabienne Jach from Dreamtree Life Coaching. She is going to share with us some information about grief and how grief can affect us in different ways. But before we get into that, I'm going to read a little bio on Fabienne and just to kind of give you an idea of where she came from, and then she'll share a little bit more about herself. Is it okay with you, Fabienne?
Absolutely.
All right, great. Now, out of all the times, I just had my thing up here and it's like, okay. All right. Fran, please forgive me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a little slow here on the pool. Oh, there it goes, because I put it on the side. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, Fabienne, she's a life coach with over 20 years of experience. She helps teams and individuals thrive, specializing in grief and loss. And she helps people to navigate those challenges and transitions through collaborative, reflective, and realistic counseling. So, Fabienne, I would love for you to share more about what you do, how you do it, because grief is a big thing that people may not know how to deal with.
Yeah.
Because go.
Oh, I'll let you finish.
Sorry. My mouth. So I mentioned earlier that when we are grieving and I see people saying, oh, hey, I'm sorry for your loss, I don't like to say I'm sorry because I don't really know if that even helps them in the grieving process.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I answered, you can't really feel responsible for their grieving process because it's going to be so unique to each person. And it's really hard to find the perfect thing to say. So unless you know someone intimately and you know exactly what would bring them comfort, it's safest to just go with something generic as and authentic from the heart, as like, I'm sorry for your loss. Because the thing is, when we try to find a thing, we talk about maybe, oh, they're in a better place or they're not in pain anymore. Those things don't necessarily bring the griever comfort. Unless you know that that's going to help, it doesn't always help. Because the person who's in pain is still here. You're talking to them. Mm-hmm. So it's not, we want to find things, and often a lot of what we end up saying is really because of our own discomfort holding space for their pain. Ooh. We're uncomfortable with them being in pain and we want to fix that, but we can't.
Ooh. Talk about that more. I never thought about that, like the way that we deal with grief, we're just projecting it onto the other person. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. A lot of it is that we're watching somebody in pain is a very uncomfortable experience for most people. And it's often what somebody needs when they're in pain is somebody to just be with them and not try to fix it. Mm-hmm. And we're a problem-solving society. You know, we like to fix it. We like to get it done. We like to finish it off and then we're good. But you can't do that with grief. Grief is it's unique to each person. It's unique to each situation. And so when we apply this, oh, you're in pain, here, I'm going to say some things that make you feel better. It's because we get squirmy, just, watching somebody be in pain and not be able to do something about it. So it ends up being a reflection on our discomfort that makes us essentially kind of awkward around grief.
So, like, how do we hold space for somebody if we don't really know how to do that?
Good question. Again, everyone's going to have a different bandwidth issue, and I'm speaking about the griever, the person who's in pain. But often, I suggest being inquisitive and asking, would you like companionship?
Mm-hmm.
Would you like me to just hang out with you and, do nothing? Hang out with you and watch a movie. Hang out and reminisce. That can be one of the ways you can bring somebody comfort without having them also feel like they have to be responsible for how you're feeling about the situation.
Oh, so they can also take on the responsibility of how we feel in their grief?
Well, absolutely, because they're so raw, and let's say, for example, I'm grieving and my friend is falling apart because I'm grieving. Now I'm also feeling like, oh no, they're sad because I'm sad. So it's a little, I feel a little responsible about this. It's not, it's complex. It's not clear cut. It's not easy. So generally I suggest, if I am advising somebody just on how to support somebody who's grieving, or when I'm working with people who are grieving, communication is key. And remember that somebody who's in the throes of it, when they are in a lot of pain, they might not even be able to answer those questions. It's, I would go with yes, no questions, as opposed to, let's think of it this way. How many times, and I have been so guilty of it, now that I know better, I don't do it anymore. But, someone has just lost a loved one. And I say, I'm here if you need it. Just tell me what you need. Well, that person just heard this about 10 times from 10 different people, and they have no clue what they need. But they know what they don't need, and that's to make 10 different decisions, Wow. So it's easier to say things like, can I come over and spend time with you in 2 days? That's a yes, no question. Can I bring you dinner tonight? That's a yes, no question. Things where the answer doesn't have to be complicated, like, oh, let me sort it out. Let me see, because we think we're availing ourselves, and we are, but you're not talking to somebody who has the cognitive faculties that are functioning as calmly as, somebody who's not in pain. So when you're dealing with somebody whose emotions are really heightened, it's a lot harder for them to sit there and process, okay, this person wants to help me and I don't know what they need.
I was going to ask, when we, I'm sitting here now thinking about the different moments where I had seen, like, my cousin, them lose their parents, and I wanting to go and fix it, like you said earlier. And then you mentioned us wanting to avail. What does that mean? Because I wasn't sure.
Yeah, we want to be available for them to lean on us.
Okay.
But we're asking them to make decisions. And, if you've ever been in an emotional crisis, that is not your best decision-making moment. So when somebody is in that heightened emotional state and they're essentially in crisis, that isn't going to be the easiest time for them to decide how they need help or how they need others to show up. So that's why I said yes, no questions end up being easier, if at all. But, saying something like, can I come over this weekend, do your laundry, for example, ways that are concrete, and that person can say, no, I don't want to see anyone, or yes, please come. Make it as simple for that person to answer, to help guide how you can help them.
Okay. So the first thing is to hold space for them. And the second thing is to ask them questions, yes, no, to make it simple so they don't have more things to really hold, I guess, to have more weight to hold, if that's the, I don't know if I have the right term. So how in the world did you get into grief coaching? Like, did you something happen significantly? Like what? How did you get here?
Yeah, a lot of things happened. Well, my personal story is I lost my sister to colon cancer in 2013, and it was like a 4-year long battle with cancer. So it was just brutal and devastating. And at this moment, I'll only talk about that because there were many other instances of loss throughout in my life. I had no idea what to do. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know how to make it stop hurting. I felt like I had a limb amputated and I had this phantom pain full time.
Wow.
And so I didn't really have a lot of resources. And yet I've got this fantastic community of best friends. And what I realized I needed, because everyone was checking in with me and it was overwhelming. And I thought, you know what, friends, how about I send you an email whenever I have the bandwidth and update you with what's going on and what I want from you. And this is just me. I can't speak for other people, but for me at that point, what I wanted my friends to talk about their normal lives. I wanted them to not feel like they couldn't share the joys of their lives because I was in pain. I needed to be reminded that life goes on, you know?
So could you repeat that part again?
Oh, I needed to be reminded that life goes on. So that was what worked for me. And I realized, I had to discover this on my own. I had zero guidance. And so I think that was my first foray into death, like in a really substantial way. Now, how I got into specializing in grief and losses was over the pandemic. I had some clients who were dealing with grief, losing loved ones. I had one client who had lost her husband to suicide, and we worked every week together. And I learned a lot. I think I grew a lot personally from those experiences. And I didn't realize at the time, but it had become kind of a real strong area of interest for me. So I was listening to Claire Bidwell-Smith. She's actually a grief specialist, therapist practicing out of the Bay Area. She has a podcast, and I was listening to her podcast obsessively. I was reading a lot about it. I was attending talks and just kind of keeping that in my realm. I was just feeding my brain and my heart with all this information. And I think in tandem with also supporting people who were grieving, when a friend of mine who was a therapist said to me, things will just fall into place. You'll know exactly what it is you're meant to do at some point. And as she was saying it, I already knew. I was like, it's grief and loss. It's just, I didn't have to actually think about it. It just came from the heart. And I thought, that's it. That's my specialty. So that was how I started moving forward in that direction. And I think it's interesting. And I have a lot of thoughts about how we handle death.
Sure, because because a lot of people really, like you said earlier, some of us don't know how to self-regulate ourselves. Some of us don't know how to deal with grief. So sharing those points would be definitely, just really helpful tools and resources, because if you don't have a reference point, some people go deep end.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, please. The floor is yours.
So where was I going to go with that? I think for starters, focusing on, when you are supporting somebody who has lost somebody, keep it simple, keep it authentic, and remember that it's not going to go away in 2 weeks or 6 weeks or when they come back to work. Their grief, excuse me, is going to last so much longer. And it's okay to check in. 6 months from now, your friend or your loved one is appearing for, all intents and purposes, like they're back on their game and everything's fine. It's okay to ask, how are you? How's your heart? Because the grief doesn't end after a specific timeline. I call it a roller coaster, because it really is. You don't know how it's going to hit you. You don't know whether everything's going to be fine for 3 weeks, and then you're in the supermarket and you see anything that just reminds you of that person, and you break down. I mean, it takes you by surprise.
Yeah, I have a tendency to tippy-toe around it.
I think most people do.
Because I'm like, oh my God, I really don't know what to say. Geez. So go ahead, please.
I was going to say, it's also okay to say, I don't know what to say. It's because that's real. If you're trying too hard, then you've separated yourself from your heart. If you say, I'm sad for you, I don't know what to say, it's okay.
I had this moment where I have this class that I go to, and then one of the girls, she came in, and I don't know what happened. I didn't ask, but I went up to her and I said, I really feel like I need to give you a hug. I'm not going to ask you anything, but are you open to that? And she was like, yes. And we stood there for like a good 5 minutes, and she was just crying.
Oh.
Yeah. And so afterwards, she came up to me after class and was like, thank you for doing that. I said, you're welcome. I said, did you need another hug? She's like, yeah. Oh. And so I think it's like moments like those when we step out of our own, I don't know if the right word is lack of insecurity or comfort zone, and just be in that holding space, I guess, for them.
Yeah.
That could help them in their healing journey.
You're just showing up for them authentically, and you're not trying to solve their problem to make yourself more comfortable. You're meeting them where they are. And that's exactly what you did in that example. You didn't try to find out what was going on so that you could fix it. You met your classmate where she was. Yeah. And, and that, I think that's beautiful. And, we need to do more of that. And it's okay.
Are there some other keys? Because I have a colleague of mine who recently lost her husband. And sometimes we'll talk about how that looks for her. And I was wondering, like, if you've been in a relationship for such a long time, and now, like you said before, you lost your sister to cancer, and it's like you have this phantom hurt. How do you, I know you said that it takes there's no time frame on it. What are some steps, or what are some keys that we can do to I guess, self-heal outside of other people trying to comfort us? Like, what are some of the things that we can do ourselves if that's something that's happened to us?
Oh, I say be kind, be compassionate with yourself. Often there are so many different emotions that come into the person who's grieving, into their realm. Guilt and shame are some of the big ones, and those are hard. A lot of times people feel like they could have prevented the death if they had done something differently, and of course that's not true. But we are designed to problem solve, and so when somebody that we love has died, we look for how we could have done things differently to avoid that problem. And it's not, there is nothing that you could have done, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to believe anyone causes someone else's death when it's, accidental. So I say, be compassionate with yourself.
Okay.
Find a resource, find somebody, whether it's a professional or somebody in your personal life who can be present with with you, with what you're going through. When I work with clients, I try to support them re-engaging with the world at the capacity that they're able to. And by that, I mean, socializes when you can and to whatever capacity. Maybe it's just one-on-one with friends once a week, but don't completely retreat, because you do need those people. You do need to get back out in the world. And again, gently, very gently, stay healthy. It's natural to want to let ourselves go, to not care, but it's really important for our well-being to stay healthy. Continue to, go walk. If you can't do an hour-long walk, or you can't hit the gym, walk around the block. Get 10 minutes of sunshine on your face, and then go back in your house. Baby steps all the way through, because those things are going to help get people back on track. And, there are scientific studies that are suggesting that all of these different things contribute to feeling better. And the better we feel, the more we can kind of continue to learn to live with the pain while also regaining our lives back.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier about that too, like when you were grieving with your sister, how you needed the people to come and remind you that there's still life. And I thought that it was more of a distraction to keep your mind away from that.
No, for me, in particular, it was because I was so caught up in my own pain. I was getting divorced and I'd gotten laid off. So it was like the trifecta. Ooh. So I was by myself all the time. I needed to be reminded that life was going on. People were still having babies, and, people were walking their dogs. I ended up adopting my first dog because of that. I thought I need a purpose, because I am just home by myself and this is not good.
So finding something that makes us happy, like you mentioned, like getting a dog, or like maybe some hobbies or something, those are things that could also help in getting us back into the now.
Yes. And I would say, make sure not to bite off more than you can chew, but a lot of times serving others. So for example, adopting a dog, or even just walking a dog at a shelter, maybe volunteering a couple days a week, doing things that are in service to another creature or being helps pull us out of where we are in that moment. But it does so in a good way. That's a good kind of distraction, as opposed to, drinking, for example, which might feel good in the moment, but that's long-term. It's not good for us.
Oh yeah. I have stories behind that, but I won't get into that here.
We probably all do.
You mentioned something to me when we first talked about how grief comes in more forms than we think, like in losing someone physically. And I really love that story about how when we move away from our neighborhood and you have this longtime neighbor you no longer see, and that's also a form of grief. Are there other things that we may not consider grief that we can look out for? And yeah.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I think pretty much any kind of loss requires a time of transition, where there's a point where we let it go, we mourn it, it ends, and then we embrace the new thing. So, for example, often even good things can come with some level of sadness or bittersweet sensation. That's you buy a new home, like that was the example. You move to a better neighborhood, the schools are better, the house is bigger, you're really happy, but now you don't know your neighbors anymore, and you lived someplace for 10 years and you knew all your neighbors, and you had supported each other through those years. You'd watched your kids grow up together. there is, even though your new situation is desirable and is rewarding in a lot of capacities, you lost something. And there are trade-offs to a lot of these. Like, you get a promotion, you work in a different part of the office, you no longer run into one of your favorite people, in the lunchroom, because now it's a different lunchroom or what have you,
Totally.
And there are a lot of sort of obvious, so like in the hierarchy of losses, losing someone close to us is probably at the top, right? Okay. And then it starts kind of moving downward, like losing pets, then losing jobs.
I didn't know there was a hierarchy of losses.
Well, that's the way I see it.
Okay.
Yeah. There probably is. I'm just in the way I experience it. I think that, just speaking from the things that hurt us the most pain that we feel. But, we can take them all the way down to losing our youth, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 56. And so you, at some point, at least I look in the mirror and I'm like, I have lost my youth. I may be youthful, but I am not young.
I'm about to be 45.
Well, and so you've got a little time, but and at some point, you look at yourself and you're not how you had been in thinking of yourself for 20 years. Yeah. And there's a letting go. There's a pretty good book called Transitions by I wrote William Bridges that I thought did a really nice job of talking about how to fully embrace this new phase in life, you have to also let go of the previous one. And they can take the time isn't fixed. But for example, when I moved in with my husband before we got married, I probably thought about the place I had left for about a year, because I was living alone and it was quiet and there was a creek running through the property I lived on. We had hawks in the trees, so it was very, very
rain,
kind of wild. I loved it, even though it was still in the Bay Area. So it took a while to stop thinking about it and to stop missing it, to be really present where I am today. Now I almost never think about it. And, thankfully, one of my best friends had recommended the book Transitions. And she said, it's going to take you a while because it's such a substantial change. Don't be hard on yourself. And I repeated that to my husband, saying, don't be hard on me. It's going to take me a while. But that's a case of, a smaller loss of complete autonomy and independence. And I don't live alone anymore. So there are so many things that we can grieve. And don't even get me started about the pandemic and what it's done to us.
Oh no, please go into it. Please.
We'll go into it.
We need it. Yeah.
I hear so many different types of stories, from we don't know how to socialize anymore to we don't know how to make small talk. When people ask, how are you? I'm like, wait, how far back do you want me to go? I haven't seen you in 3 years. So much has happened. And I kind of joke about it, but I've gotten into the habit of saying, tell me how your last week has been. Because it's easier. So good. But it makes it overwhelming. And I attend some like larger community events in my realm. And, after the third or 10th or 15th person that you are talking to and you say, hi, how are you? You realize you can't continue to tell that big story over and over again. So how do the pandemic has done that to us, because I used to see my friends regularly and now it's years, sometimes I don't see my best friends except for once or twice a year. And that's a lot to catch up on. So there's that. Then there's the working from home, the losing confidence, the losing, there's just the subtleties of how we interact with each other.
What do you mean by that, losing confidence when we're working at home?
Just some of the things that have happened in, let's see if I can find a way to describe it really well. I when everything has changed and we're not socializing anymore, you know, the way we identify, I think, as humans in our tribe or whatever chosen tribe, is that the people we surround ourselves with are also a little bit of a mirror for us.
Our social.
And when we don't, when all that's been eliminated, and we're also told to fear being around people for a few years.
Mm.
Then when we're sort of thrown back out there, there's that, you know, do I know how to do this? You know, I mean, it ties into socializing again, but there's a sense of maybe, you know, people are still on social media, so maybe there's FOMO, like, oh well, these people all have their lives together, and I've been wearing sweatpants for the last 3 weeks. You know, so there's this sort of fake, everyone else is doing it better than you, and then you're then going out into the world, and you don't have the confidence you used to have when it was easy, when it was natural, when you could just run into friends.
Because you had them around and you can practice that that dialogue and that communication.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, I didn't realize that was like also lost too. That's interesting.
Yeah. So there are a lot of them. And then, you know, we don't think of, I was talking about aging, like losing youth, health issues, not being able to do what we used to be able to do, injuries to our bodies, whether physical injuries or whether through illnesses, but losing that. Those are also losses that, you know, some people can roll with it, and others can, you know, are struggling, and they're very real.
Speaking of rolling with it, I have my professor that I work with for jujitsu.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time that she told me, like, she was trying to teach me how to fall, and I don't like falling because it's hard for me to get up. I'm a big girl. So I'm like, professor, I don't like falling. She's like, Fran, you gotta fall. We're gonna fall in life. It's really more of how you take that energy and learn how to use it in your favor. And I'm like, oh wow. Okay, are we talking about martial arts or are we talking about life here? So that leads me back to say, when you mentioned earlier about letting go, I don't know if you answered it earlier. You may have, and maybe I'm asking the question again. How, when you were at that place where you had the hawk in the stream, how can some people, I guess, find themselves in a space to learn how to let, I guess, those things go?
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of it is about getting recentered in the moment. And I think there are some techniques that are actually really good for anxiety. And anxiety is, you know, sort of fear of the future. Excuse me. So anyway, some of the same exact practices, I think those exercises are good also for bringing people back to the present, because that's one of the ways to help with anxiety. It, I think, also helps with people who are looking back and still holding on. And there may be a thing, this is going to be a two-part answer. So the first part would be doing these exercises to kind of recenter yourself and being in the moment, in the present. And the second part is, why are you still hanging on? What's missing today?
Ooh.
And the investigative work in going, was it the location? Was it being so close to nature? Was it the quiet? You know, identifying what it was, as opposed to, I just missed that time. If you can identify what it was, then you can invite that back into your world, some capacity.
That's so beautiful. Oh, that's so beautiful. So like, when now that you don't have like those things around you that you had before, like what were some of those things that you incorporated for yourself? Because was the hawk and the stream missing for you? Did you like get you a little indoor fountain? Like what did you do to bring that back into your space? How? Oh, girl, this is a good tool.
Well, you know, it's funny because it was, I think primarily it was the peace and quiet, because I'm now living with one person full time, and two people part time, my stepkids. And you're looking at it. This used to be our garage, so we converted the garage into my office so that I could have that peace and quiet. And we insulated the walls as best as possible because I needed a place to retreat when it was too much for me. And I didn't want to like leave the house. Sometimes I just need 15 minutes. So that was one. I missed nature, but that was an easy fix because I instead of walking my dog in a neighborhood, I take her to the green spaces nearby and we walk out in nature every day. And so I got that back into my world as well. Those were the two things I think that I identified missing. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. What about people who like are taking care of others and they know that the time frame for their loved ones is coming up very soon? How do they prepare themselves for that transition?
Oh, good question. I don't know how much one can do to prepare. You know, it's interesting because depending on the type of, maybe the time in their lives, the type of illness that they had, what their decline looked like. I call it, there's the pre-grieving, you know, the grieving before they die. If somebody's in terminal illness or they have dementia, they're grieving as, you know, they're losing that person for sometimes up to 2 years before they're actually gone. Sometimes that makes it easier. Sometimes it does not. So it's not, because it's so unique. It's like any passage. It depends on the person. So as far as preparing, there isn't really a concrete plan of action. It's more about accepting, being as present as possible. And, you know, if you can prepare by identifying who can be there for you, you know, who can help you sort out the paperwork because it's going to be too much. You know, those are logistical things that you can actually prepare for. But as far as how you're going to navigate your feelings, you don't even know what you're going to be. So you just have to accept and not just accept that they're gone, accept the pain that you're experiencing.
Wow. I didn't really think acceptance was a part of the process. So,
yeah,
wow. I know I was going to ask you something, but it was getting so good. So in my post, I put something that said, good grief. Is there such a thing?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I don't know. That really made me think. And I'm like, is there such a thing as good grief? Grief is a measure of the love that we have for that person. So maybe through that lens, the pain we're in is maybe an identifier of the love that we had for that person. But I don't know. I think it's neutral. That's the thing. I think we think of it as a negative because it's so painful, but it's neutral in the sense that it's not bad, but it's not good. It's just a part of life.
Can you talk more about that? Because I know when I think of that word grief and loss, like I feel like a heaviness. I feel like sadness. I feel like a depressive state almost when it comes to those words. I guess what would be some better lenses to identify grief as? Because it's like, I can no longer reach out to this loved one. Like one of my colleagues told me that her husband passed away, and she said that she's still in love with him, and he's no longer here. And I've never heard anything as deep as that. Like, you still love this person that's no longer here. You can't embrace them. You cannot physically touch. It's just, that is so deep.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to hear that. Well, so it's interesting. I just listened to a talk by David Kessler, who's a renowned grief expert, and he talked about the sixth stage of grief, making meaning. And he was saying that at the point in which people start to regain their life, when they start getting their life back, they start making peace with that loss and being able to, live side by side with it. They start to, he refers to it as making meaning. And by that, I mean, I'm not doing a good job of describing this at all.
No. I was thinking, because when you said live side by side, there's a saying by Liz Gilbert, who wrote, I think it's Big Magic. And she's writing a letter to fear. And she's telling fear, you can come along this new journey that we're taking. You can sit in the passenger side. You can talk to me, but you cannot take the steering wheel of where we're going. And when you said that we can live with the grief, I was thinking in those same, like in that same category, like we can definitely say that same thing to grief. Like, hey, you can hang out for a little bit, you can roll, but I'm taking the wheel, and I'll talk to you when I feel that I have the need to. Is it something very similar?
I think in time that's ideal, where you're no longer, the grief is no longer driving the bus. It's a passenger. And I think when I was talking about making meaning, it's about how we remember. So this might go back to what you were talking about, your friend who lost her husband. The way we remember someone, the way is how they stay alive and how they stay with us. And as we were able to think of them, we're able to maybe even talk to them the way we talk about them to others and tell the stories. That's making meaning out of their lives for us. And that's when we start becoming more at peace with that loss. And so I think that is sort of that side by side thing, where you're no longer being controlled by that pain. You are now experiencing that they are still alive through you, through their stories.
Oh, that's good. I have a friend where she lost her dad, but I really love the way that she carries herself, the way she communicates, and just how she interacts with people. And I said, man, your dad must have been an awesome dude. And she's like, my dad really was an awesome dude. I said, well, even though I haven't had a chance to meet him, I feel like I can see him and feel him through who you are as an individual, because life is what that is, right? We leave imprints upon people.
Absolutely.
And these impressions, whether we realize it or not, they're left with us, and we can take a piece of that with us wherever we're going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really beautiful. It reminds me of after my sister died, I would garden, or I would, save a spider or whatever, just stuff that I would normally do. But my sister was, she was a horticulturist and arborist, and so and animal and insect lover. So I would think that I am almost embodying her in that moment, even though this is still something that I would do anyway. It's also embodying her value system in my actions, and that was exactly it, that I'm bringing part of the way she's imprinted on me in my life I'm continuing that legacy. So yeah.
So beautiful. Well, we're going to get ready to close up the podcast. We're going to play a round robin game, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, let's do it.
But before we go, is there anything that you wanted to share with people? Let me see, maybe where they can. I'm going to put all your social media links in the on our video.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you wanted to share significantly that has to deal with grief, and then also too, what is up for you next? What are some awesome things that are happening for you? Are you writing a book? Like, what are on the next?
Yeah.
The next level for you?
Funny you should say that. I have started writing a book. I really wanted to put together a resource for people who that was not overwhelming. And I think part of the issue, like I said, when people are grieving, is everything is too much. Mm-hmm. And there are so many good books out there, but there can also be one book that's a little bit of like the cheat sheet of books, so to speak, a little bit here, a little bit there, as an introduction, when people just need a resource that they can flip through on their own time. That's the book I'm writing. So that's really exciting and fun. And I wish I had more time to write, because I love to write. But we'll see.
Right.
What else? I'm planning on holding some workshops. I've been doing a lot, even though I've had to practice for 5 years. I really only started doing like all the marketing in 2024. So that right now, because I'm doing so much of it, I've sort of put workshops on hold. But as things ease up a little bit, I'm going to start holding workshops. So those are the two things that are up next for me.
Do you work with your clients virtually, or do you meet with them in person?
Virtually. Yeah. It's easier for everyone's schedule. Certainly easier for mine. And I work out of my home office. So then we don't need to have any interruptions. And my husband works upstairs. So I have complete privacy here. I would have to, commute and rent a place somewhere. This is much more convenient. And I think as long as we're able to see each other, I think everybody, especially through the pandemic, we've gotten used to working over video. So it's not too bad.
Where's the easiest place that people can find you online?
dreamingtreelifecoaching.com.
All right. Super. Well, you all heard it yourself. Fabienne, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, yeah, that's right. I got to ask you my round robin question.
Right.
All right. So first question, and then we have 5 minutes.
Okay.
For 3 questions. What were you like as a child?
Highly imaginative. I think this is probably exemplary, but I would take all my dolls and line them all up. I had like 30 of them, different, sizes and shapes. Put pieces of paper in front of all of them, and then I would teach class. So
you were already ready.
I kept myself very occupied. I would make up stories. I was curious. I could be left alone for hours. I'm, maybe a little bit still that way. But so that was me as a child. I think my mom says I was a very happy baby as long as I was fed and I slept. And I'm like, yeah, I'm still the same. No, I don't want to get hangry. And I need my sleep.
That is so funny. Like, man, that was preparing you for what you're doing now.
Yeah.
What is your biggest fear?
Oh my goodness. I read the book Johnny Got His Gun something like 25 years ago. And that is my biggest fear. Not able.
Tell me about it.
I think it was this soldier who was wounded in, I think, the Vietnam War, was deaf, became deaf, blind, could not speak, and was paralyzed. But he could communicate somehow, I'm trying to think, maybe it was by blinking. I don't remember now, but he eventually was able to communicate in Morse code, and but he was trapped basically in his own body. That's my fear.
Wow. Lord.
Yeah,
I'm
that
gonna
did it
take
for
that one
me.
out of here. That'd be my fear too. It's like, man, you can't communicate.
Oh, I mean, just being alive, but not being alive.
Wow.
So,
Jeez. I think we have some people that actually walk around like that, even though their bodies they can use them. They're zombies, but
yeah.
it's conversations like these that we help wake people up to mirror what they may need work on.
Yeah, let's hope so. Yeah. Everyone's on their own path. Everybody's figuring it out on their own timeline.
For sure. All right. What makes you passionate and gets you motivated?
Oh, I am, driven by beauty and harmony. And I'll give you an example. There are two ways to take the kids to school. There's a freeway, and there's a back road that takes about 3 minutes longer, but is up. It's along the ridge of the Oakland Hills, and so it's surrounded by trees and beautiful homes. And so I always choose that on Skyline Boulevard. And my 9-year-old asked, "Why don't you take the freeway? It's faster." And I said, "Because it's ugly." And like the energy's ugly because everyone's rushing. It's not as beautiful. And I realized I am driven by beauty. I like to take the scenic route. I like to be able to walk, and I notice things that are beautiful. I think I have the ability to notice details. And I thought everyone was designed that way, but the older you get, the more you realize, no, not everyone, but definitely me. Like I will notice a texture, or like the way the light's coming through a leaf, and I'll be like, oh, that looks so cool. Whereas like people would just walk by it and not notice it. So beauty. It comes down to beauty.
Because I know when I go on walks too, that I notice, I stop and I look if I see a flower, even though the rest of it might look weird. I'm like, oh, there's beauty in this little thing. Right here. Is that kind of the same thing?
Yes. And I'll add, and I think that ties into also being driven by love. I think we could, as humans all around the world, could tap in a little bit more into that. Like, just don't be such a hater about everything. It's okay. It's okay to be nice to people. It's okay.
We were talking earlier about that too, like sharing resources as women in business, and how that could show up in different ways, contention, or being insecure. What's another one? The competition.
Competition, yeah.
When, we're describing this thing with this flower that might be beautiful and maybe the bush is all effed up, but there is beauty in our contribution.
Yes. Yeah. When you show up authentically, if people don't know what to do with that, that's on them. But a lot of people are very responsive to it. And I don't know if you ski or do any kind of snow sports, but there's a thing.
I'm an island girl. We in the water. No snow for me.
This has come up in conversation in sessions this week. It's almost been like a theme where I've told the story, but when I snowboard, and they tell you, if you don't want to hit the tree and you're riding through the trees, don't look at the tree, look at the space in between the trees, because you're going to go where you put your attention. So that applies back to supporting women. If you're thinking women are competition, you're going to attract that. You're thinking women are supportive, that is what you're going to attract. So where you put your attention is where you're going to go. You're either going to hit that tree or you're going to clear it.
Wow.
It's up to you.
Well, thank you for those words of wisdom. That's a great way to end the show. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Fabienne, if you can let them know where they can find you again. And
Absolutely.
thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, Fran, thank you. It's been such a delight to talk with you. I can be found at DreamingTree Life Coaching. My website's the easiest resource to track me down and get in touch with me. And I'm on Instagram. I've got a Facebook page. I'm on LinkedIn, but all of it can, if you find one, you can locate the others.
Great.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. If you could stay on. All right, everyone, you have a good weekend and don't get too turned.